"If I were her daughter-in-law, I'd be ashamed to have a mother-in-law who lives off her son," he said, his eyes glinting with disdain. The room fell quiet. You could hear the clink of crystal glasses and the low hum of jazz from the speakers tucked behind velvet drapes. But around our table, one of many at the Clarendon penthouse that night, there was a silence heavier than the chandelier hanging over us. I kept my gaze on my napkin. It was cream-colored linen, folded into a swan. Beautiful, in the way things are when they're expensive but meaningless. Across from me sat Amanda, my daughter-in-law. Brilliant, composed, raised in wealth. She didn't say a word, but the corners of her mouth twitched upward, just slightly. A glimmer of satisfaction passed over her face like a shadow crossing polished marble. She sipped her wine delicately, eyes fixed on me, and I could feel it, her smug relief that someone else had said what she might never dare to say aloud. My son, Derek, who had inherited my husband's quiet eyes and sense of restraint, sat beside her. His jaw tightened, but he didn't look up. He didn't look at me. Instead, he adjusted the cuff of his shirt and reached for the breadbasket, as though nothing had been said, as though the man who insulted his mother at a family celebration was just making idle dinner conversation. He didn't defend me. He didn't even flinch, and I didn't blame him. Not in that moment. But I noticed. Stanley Clarendon, Amanda's father, and the man who'd just delivered that blow leaned back in his chair with the smug satisfaction of someone who assumed the room agreed with him. A man who never thought twice before cutting someone down. He adjusted the cuff of his monogrammed shirt and took a sip of his Bordeaux. Vintage, probably. I wouldn't know. I preferred sweet tea. But I knew a bitter man when I saw one. Stanley had never approved of me. Not from the first day Amanda brought Derek home to meet her family. To him, I was beneath them, just a public school teacher from Baltimore, a widow without pedigree or financial clout. The fact that I was a black woman who raised a successful son without connections or inheritance seemed to offend him on a molecular level. And tonight, he had decided to remind me of my place. I looked up from the swan napkin and met his eyes. I smiled. Softly, politely. "Would you excuse me?" I said, standing slowly. "I need a moment." No one stopped me. Not Amanda, not Derek, certainly not Stanley. They probably thought I was embarrassed, humiliated even. Let them. I walked out onto the terrace. The city spread before me like a lit-up promise. Manhattan glowed beneath the stars, skyscrapers reaching for something eternal. I leaned against the railing, breathing in the cool night air. My hands trembled just slightly, not from hurt, but from holding back. I wasn't new to this. You see, Stanley Clarendon didn't know me. Not really. He didn't know the nights I stayed up grading essays by candlelight when the power got cut. He didn't know the sacrifices my husband Walter and I made so Derek could go to med school without debt. He didn't know that I had built something, in silence, behind all that he chose to ignore. He didn't know I was the reason his company still existed. And I hadn't told Amanda either. Not yet. The thing about truth is, it waits. It doesn't knock down doors. It doesn't scream to be believed. It waits quiet, steady, until it's time. I leaned my elbows on the railing and closed my eyes. Walter used to tell me, "Let them underestimate you. There's power in being unseen." I never really understood it when he said it, but I do now. That night, they had invited me here for what they called a shareholder appreciation dinner. Stanley's voice on the phone was like maple syrup over gravel. "We'd be honored to have you join us," he'd said. "We want to thank a mysterious investor who's helped our family company more than they know." I knew who they were thanking. They just didn't know it was me. The irony was as rich as the wine they served. 25 years ago, after Walter passed, I sat in our kitchen and read every financial book I could get my hands on. While grieving, while teaching full-time, I learned about markets and stocks, compound interest and shareholder rights. Walter had left me his life insurance policy, $125,000. That money could have paid off the mortgage or been put away for Derek's future. But something in me said, "Don't just survive, Evelyn. Grow." So I bought stock. Quietly. Patiently. Clarendon Holdings had just gone through a PR scandal at the time, and shares were low. I bought a little more each year. Watched as they laid off workers, closed local branches, rebranded, rose again. Watched Stanley strut across magazine covers. And I never sold. Now, I own 51%, the majority, the silent power. Amanda didn't know. Derek didn't know. No one knew. But they would. Tonight was never about being thanked. It was about timing. My phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out, checked the screen. The draft email I had prepared days ago was still there. Subject line: Disclosure of ownership, Clarendon Holdings. Attachments: stock certificates, legal statements, dated transactions. I hit send. It took 2 seconds. 2 seconds to change everything. When I turned back toward the room, I saw Stanley through the glass doors, lifting his wine glass to make another toast. Amanda was smiling, polite, attentive. Derek had that tired look he got when trying to please everyone. And I was done playing small. I adjusted my cardigan, took a deep breath, and walked back inside. Tomorrow, they would know. Tomorrow, the story of Evelyn Brooks, just a teacher, would begin again. I sat alone in the back of the taxi, the Manhattan skyline melting into a blur of gold and steel through the window. My fingers rested over the clasp of my purse, still warm from the weight of my phone. The email had been sent. I didn't need to check it twice. The driver asked me if I wanted music. I told him no. I wanted silence. Not because I was angry, but because I was remembering. As we drove, I thought of Walter. He'd been gone 25 years now, and still, on nights like this, I could feel him with me. Not in the haunting, sentimental way people speak about lost loved ones, but in small, anchoring ways. The way I still use the phrase, "don't forget your gloves," like he used to. The way I reached for cinnamon before sugar, because he'd always preferred it that way. The way I still opened the third drawer in our bedroom dresser and read his letters. He started writing me letters after his diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer. We didn't have time, not enough of it anyway. So he gave me what he could. Words. 1 letter a week, placed in the same drawer, always sealed with his initials and a date. At first, I thought they were goodbye letters. But they weren't. They were instructions. Encouragements. Maps. That night, after the party, I pulled one out. It was dated exactly a month before he passed. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges, but his handwriting was still steady, tight loops and long strokes. Just like his voice, strong and unshaken. "Eve," it began, "if you're reading this after one of those awful dinners with people who think they know everything, let me remind you, they don't know you. They never will. But you, my love, have always been able to outthink, outwait, and outwalk them all." I closed my eyes. I could still hear him, clear as day. "I know you've never been interested in money, not in the way people like them are. But you understand value, and that's rarer. You see what things are worth, even when the world calls them cheap. That's your gift. That's why I trust you with everything I've built and everything we haven't yet." I folded the letter back, slowly, like it might crumble if I moved too fast. Walter never had much to give me in dollars, but what he gave me in faith was worth more than anything Stanley Clarendon ever held in his greedy hands. After the funeral, I spent 3 nights at the dining room table with a calculator, his pension documents, a shoebox full of receipts, and a manual titled Investing for Beginners. I had no one to ask. My parents were long gone. Derek was still in school. I didn't tell anyone, not even my pastor. When people grieve, they expect a woman to cry, to fall apart, to need rescuing. No one expects her to teach a full day at school, then go home and read financial statements until her eyes blur. But that's what I did. I bought my first shares of Clarendon Holdings on a Friday in April. The company was struggling bad PR, rumors of fraud, stock dropping fast. It was Stanley's first major test as CEO, and most analysts predicted failure. That was when I bought in. I didn't buy much. Just a few $1,000s worth at first. But I kept at it, month after month, year after year. The company survived, then thrived. And through every split, every merger, every shift, I held on. People like Stanley think they're the architects of empire. But sometimes, the quiet ones at the foundation are the real builders. Back in the present, I set the letter on my nightstand and turned off the lamp. Tomorrow, I knew the emails would start, the calls, the panic, the begging, and eventually, when the dust settled, the reckoning. At sunrise, my inbox had 17 new messages, 4 from Clarendon Holdings board members, 2 from Stanley's executive assistant, 1 from Amanda, and 1, most surprisingly, from Derek. It was short. "Mom, we need to talk. Today. Please." I made myself a cup of coffee, black, and sat at the kitchen table. The same one where I'd taught Derek how to do fractions. The same one where I balanced every account after Walter died. Where I dreamed in silence. My phone buzzed again. Amanda. Calling this time, I didn't answer. Instead, I stepped outside. The sky was pale pink, and the neighborhood still had that hush to it early morning before the world remembers it has noise to make. My neighbor, Mrs. Redmond, waved from her porch. She was in her 70s, widowed, always wrapped in a shawl and full of opinions. She called out, "Morning, Evelyn. That son of yours still saving lives?" I smiled. "One patient at a time." She nodded approvingly and sipped from her mug. "Good boy. You raised him right." I wondered, then, if she would still think that if she'd seen him last night, seen him sit silent while his mother was insulted. Still, I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was patient. Like Walter taught me. Let people show you who they are, then decide. Back inside, I poured a second cup of coffee and opened Derek's message again. I typed out a reply. "Come by after work. 6 p.m. Bring Amanda if she wants to talk too." I signed it like I always did. "Love, Mom." I didn't mention the shares, or the email, or Stanley's words. They already knew. And tonight, they'd hear the rest. Derek arrived exactly at 6:02 p.m. Punctual, as always, but just late enough to suggest hesitation. Amanda followed 2 steps behind, her heels clicking softly on the porch. She wore a navy dress with a camel trench coat draped over her shoulders like a cape, as if she expected paparazzi to be waiting. Her hair was swept into a low bun, not a strand out of place. Derek, by contrast, looked like he hadn't slept. His tie was loose, and he kept rubbing the back of his neck like it itched from guilt. I had already set the table. 3 plates, cornbread warm in a basket, collard greens still steaming, and roasted chicken just like Derek liked it growing up. He paused when he saw the food. "I haven't had this in a while," he said, offering a small, tired smile. "I know," I replied, gesturing toward the chairs. "Sit. Let's eat before we talk." Amanda sat stiffly, her back barely touching the chair. She didn't look at me. Instead, she focused on her cloth napkin, folding and unfolding it in her lap like it was made of glass. Dinner was quiet. The only sounds were the soft clink of utensils and the low hum of the radio playing an old Sam Cooke tune in the background. I didn't rush the conversation. I never did. People talk when they're ready. When the plates were mostly clean, Derek cleared his throat. "Mom, I owe you an apology." I looked up, steady. "For last night," he continued. "For not saying anything when Stanley said what he said." Amanda's head tilted slightly, her lips pressing into a tighter line. I waited. "I should have said something. I should have stood up for you," Derek said. But I froze, and I'm sorry. "You didn't freeze," I said calmly. "You chose silence." That made him flinch, just a little. But I didn't say it to punish him, only to name the truth. I raised you to respect people, not to fear them, not even your in-laws. End quote. Amanda finally spoke. "It was a misunderstanding. My father didn't mean it." I cut in, gentle but firm. "He meant every word. And so did you, Amanda, when you looked at me like you were glad he said it." Her eyes flashed, and for a moment, I saw it. Not malice, but embarrassment. And pride, a dangerous mix. "I was surprised," she said, defensive now. "It was a family event. We were hosting major investors. I expected decorum." "Decor," I echoed. "That's what you saw me as? A piece of decoration? Something that didn't match the room?" Derek put a hand on her arm, a silent warning. But I wasn't looking for an argument. I was looking for clarity. "I don't expect either of you to defend me out of pity," I said. "But respect is not optional. Not for me. Not after what I've given. Not after what I've built." Amanda crossed her arms. "Why didn't you tell us?" There it was. The real question. "Because it wasn't your business," I said simply. "Not until now." She blinked, stunned by the bluntness. I continued. "You assumed I was just a retired schoolteacher, that I was dependent on Derek, that I had nothing to offer but casseroles and polite silence, and I let you believe that, because it told me everything I needed to know." Amanda's mouth opened, then shut. For once, she had nothing ready. I turned to Derek. "Do you remember when you wanted to drop out of med school after Dad died?" He nodded slowly. "You said it was too much. You said we couldn't afford it." "I remember. I told you not to worry, that I had a plan. That plan was investing. I never told you how deep I went into it, but I learned. I studied. And when I saw Clarendon Holdings fall, I bought. Every year, I bought more. And when I realized what your father-in-law was doing to the company, I bought even more. It's some..." Amanda looked genuinely confused now. "Wait, you saw the fraud?" I nodded. "Long before the press did. He covered it well. Creative accounting, misreported assets, shady side deals with foreign vendors. It was all there. I documented it, quietly, and I waited." Derek leaned forward, hands clasped. "So why now? Why reveal yourself now?" "Because the company is finally stable. Because Stanley is trying to centralize control again. And because Amanda, whether she realizes it or not, is standing in a position where she could become either a shield for him or something better." Amanda looked startled. "You want me to run the company?" "I want you to choose who you are," I said. "But first, you need to know the truth." I reached into the folder I'd placed on the sideboard and handed her a small stack of documents. My shares. Every certificate. Every transfer. Dated. Verified. I own 51%, not through proxy, not through shell companies. My name. My hand. Amanda's fingers trembled as she took the papers. Her eyes scanned the top page, and her face began to drain of color. Derek rubbed his forehead like he was trying to wake himself up. "This changes everything," he whispered. "No," I said. "This reveals everything." Amanda looked up, eyes wide. "What do you want?" I smiled, softly. "Nothing." They both stared at me. "I didn't build this to take power. I built this to protect value. If you want to lead, Amanda, I won't stop you. But you will do it with truth, transparency, and humility." She sat back in her chair, stunned, silent. I looked at both of them. "You're not the only ones who know how to build something that lasts." Stanley Clarendon did not take the news quietly. The morning after Amanda and Derek left my house, I received a call from a blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, another call, then another. On the third try, I picked up. "Evelyn," he said, his voice tight, barely restrained, like a man holding the leash of a growling dog. "We need to talk. Now." I didn't respond right away. I let the silence stretch. "Evelyn," he repeated louder, "I'm being civil here. Even auspices. That would be a first," I replied calmly. He exhaled sharply. "Lunch. Noon. My office." He didn't ask. He commanded. "I'll see you at 12:30, I said, and hung up. The Clarendon Holdings building sat like a glass monument on Fifth Avenue, 42 stories of arrogance. The lobby was marble and silence, with receptionists who didn't smile unless your name was on the door. Mine wasn't. Yet. I rode the elevator alone. Floor 38, the executive suite. Stanley's assistant, Rebecca, in her 40s, always looked like she hadn't slept, barely looked up as I walked in. "He's waiting." I stepped through the double glass doors into the lion's den. Stanley was standing by the window, hands behind his back, staring out at the skyline like it owed him something. "Evelyn," he said, not turning. "So, the teacher was the ghost investor." "The teacher," I said, setting my purse down, "is also the majority shareholder. And your new boss." And quote. That got him to turn. He didn't yell. Stanley wasn't a yeller. He was a strategist. He circled his opponent until he found the weakness. He approached now with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You've been very clever. I'll admit that." "I wasn't trying to be clever," I replied. "I was trying to be cautious." He waved a dismissive hand. "You're in over your head, Evelyn. Boardrooms aren't classrooms. And finance is a war, not a lesson plan." "And I know what war looks like, Stanley," I said. "And I know how to survive one." He sat behind his massive desk, folded his hands. "You want me out." I shook my head. "I want the company clean, transparent, functional. You think Amanda can run this place? I think she can learn, just like I did." He laughed, short, derisive. "You think this is some morality play, don't you? You reveal your little secret, teach us all a lesson, and we hand you the keys with a bow?" I don't want your keys, I said. I already have mine, and I've never needed your permission. He stood again, walked toward the bar in the corner, poured himself a drink. You have no idea the pressure I'm under. Investors breathing down my neck, foreign partnerships at risk, and now this is accountability, I said. It's long overdue. End quote. He downed the drink in one swallow. I can make this difficult for Amanda, he said suddenly. She may be your daughter-in-law, but she's my blood. I know her weaknesses. I didn't flinch. If you come after her, I said slowly, you won't just lose control of this company, you'll lose your legacy. I have everything I need to make sure of it. He stared at me. For the first time, I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Not fear, but calculation. A slow reassessment. You're serious. In first Adiasfeld, as cancer, a pause. Then, what do you want? 3 things, I said. First, you step down from daily operations, effective immediately. You can stay on the board for now, but Amanda takes your seat at the executive table. He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. Second, a full internal audit. Every corner, every department. If there's nothing to hide, you won't object. And third, I leaned forward. You call your people off. No smear campaigns, no whispered rumors, no legal threats. If Amanda is going to lead, she deserves a clean runway. He stared at me for a long time. Then finally, he nodded once, reluctantly. This isn't over, he said. It never is, I replied. I stood, took my purse, and headed for the door. Before I reached it, he spoke again. You played the long game well, Evelyn. I didn't see you coming. That's the problem, Stanley, I said over my shoulder. Men like you never do. End quote. It's needed not ranging. That evening, I sat on my porch with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the sun set behind the trees. A breeze passed through the neighborhood, carrying with it the scent of fresh-cut grass and distant barbecue. Children's laughter echoed from the corner. Amanda called. This time, I answered. He agreed, I said before she could ask. She exhaled audibly. I don't know if I'm ready. No one is, I said. But you will be. I'll help. There was a long pause. Then softer. Why are you helping me after how I treated you? Because my son loves you, I said. And because leadership isn't about perfection, it's about course correction. She didn't speak again, but her silence was different now, less guarded. That night, I wrote another letter to Walter. Asterisk, he knows now, I wrote. All of them do. But the story's just beginning. The Monday after Stanley agreed to step down, Amanda officially took her seat at the Clarendon Holdings executive table. It wasn't an easy transition. Half the board welcomed her with polite, measured applause. The other half, mostly older men with stock portfolios thicker than their empathy, looked at her like she was a substitute teacher sent in to babysit until the real CEO returned. But Amanda didn't flinch. She wore a charcoal gray suit with pearl earrings, no wedding ring, no distractions. Her tone was composed, her presentation precise. And when she introduced herself not just as Amanda Clarendon Brooks, but as acting CEO under the guidance of our majority shareholder, I saw the shift happen. Just a flicker. A shift in the air. They still didn't respect her. But they feared me. And sometimes, that's where respect begins. Back home, I sat in my kitchen, laptop open, poring over emails. Amanda had requested my help in reviewing historical contracts, vendors, international subsidiaries, hidden partnerships. We agreed on one thing. Before she could lead publicly, she needed to know what Stanley had buried in the garden. And there were a lot of skeletons. The first file I flagged was from 2017, a consultancy deal signed in Dubai for a now-defunct tech firm that had never delivered a single product. Yet Clarendon Holdings paid them over $3 million across 18 months. It services, the contract claimed, but there was no trail of deliverables, no proof of work. Amanda called me the next day. Why would he hide this under a non-disclosure code? She asked. Because it was a funnel, I said. A shell deal. He was paying off someone, or himself. She was quiet on the other end. I could hear her scribbling notes. There's more, I added. Look at the Buenos Aires property purchase from 2019. The buyer listed is a trust tied to Stanley's college roommate. The building's never been developed, yet the holding company keeps reporting property tax deductions. Amanda's breath caught. Oh my God. It's a web, I said. We're going to have to cut one thread at a time. A week into the audit, Amanda came to my house. Not a formal meeting, no business attire, just jeans, sneakers, and a hoodie. She looked exhausted, like a woman who hadn't slept in 3 days. Her face had lost its polish, but in that moment I saw something I hadn't seen in her before. Vulnerability. I need help, she said, sinking into the kitchen chair across from me. I poured her tea. Honey and lemon, no sugar, she liked it sharp. She sipped it slowly, then leaned back. He lied to me, she whispered. My entire life, he told me our company was built on integrity, on hard work. I believed him. I was proud of him. I nodded but didn't interrupt. Let her say it all. And now I'm staring at this pile of fake invoices, shadow accounts, and payouts to people I've never heard of, and I don't know who he is anymore. You know who he was to you, I said gently, but now you have to learn who he was to the rest of the world. It's hard, but it's necessary. She blinked fast, trying not to cry. I want to fix it, Evelyn. I want to make it right. You can, I said, but you'll lose friends, and comfort, and probably half your inheritance. End quote. 74 times problem. She laughed dry, bitter. Who needs a legacy built on lies? I reached across the table and touched her hand. Then let's rebuild something better. That same evening, Derek showed up. He hadn't called ahead, just knocked on the door with that sheepish look he used to wear when he forgot my birthday in college. Hey, Mom, he said. Hey, baby, I replied, stepping aside. You look tired. He smiled. I'm married to Amanda and related to Stanley. Tired is a lifestyle now. We sat on the porch, 2 rocking chairs under the soft glow of the porch light. He handed me a paper bag. Apple pie, he said, from that place you like in Harlem. It's Stillion the Revevge. I raised an eyebrow. What do you want? He chuckled. To talk, to say thank you, and to ask, how long did you plan all of this? I didn't, I said honestly. It wasn't a plan. It was survival, then strategy, then purpose. He nodded slowly. Amanda's trying hard. I see her unraveling everything she once believed. She'll be stronger for it, I said. But she'll need you. He looked down at his hands. I wasn't strong last time. Then be strong now. A long pause. Then, you're really not going to take the company, are you? No, I said. That's not my seat, but I'll be standing behind the one who earns it. He looked at me with a kind of reverence I hadn't seen in years. Not as his mother, but as a force. You're something else, Mom. I always was, I said, sipping my tea. You just didn't notice. We sat in silence for a while, the night humming softly around us. But in my heart, I knew we'd only begun pulling the thread, and the fabric beneath Stanley Clarendon's empire was thinner than anyone had imagined. By the end of the second week, the cracks in Stanley Clarendon's empire weren't just visible, they were bleeding. The internal audit Amanda had ordered began to surface in board meetings, one discovery at a time. At first they were framed as irregularities, then oversights. But by Friday morning, there was no sugar left to coat the rot. 3 former executives had quietly resigned. One vendor issued a statement denying involvement in any offshore accounts, which meant only one thing: someone had tipped the press. It wasn't me. I'd kept my silence. But the truth, once unearthed, has a scent, and vultures follow it. Amanda called an emergency meeting. Not a closed-door executive briefing. This one included legal counsel, department heads, and, importantly, 2 shareholder reps, one of whom was me. The conference room was cold. Too many bodies, not enough warmth. The kind of place where ambition chokes on its own ego. Amanda sat at the head of the table, no longer in hiding, her hair pulled back tight, her blazer crisp. She looked like a woman standing in her own bones for the first time. Before we begin, she said, I want to make something clear. Transparency is no longer optional. What we know, we reveal. What we don't, we find out. Stanley wasn't there. He had, conveniently, taken a leave of absence, a quiet retreat into shadow. Just as the fire reached the drapes, Amanda handed out packets, 50 pages each, evidence, spreadsheets, memos, When the lead compliance officer, Mr. Tran, a careful man who wore suspicion like cologne, began to speak, the room shifted. In the past 5 years, he said, we have documented at least 17 shell entities used for laundering internal funds. These funds were often disguised as consulting fees or international marketing campaigns. In most cases, there is no evidence of actual services rendered. Someone in the back let out a low whistle. I watched Amanda. She didn't blink. She had seen it all already. This was theater now for the benefit of those who still clung to denial. She turned to me. Evelyn, would you like to add anything? I stood, slowly. Just this. None of this surprises me. But what happens next will determine whether this company survives. I let the weight of silence land before continuing. We have a choice, pretend we were tricked, or admit we were complicit. Either way, we clean house, completely. No one argued, because they couldn't. That evening, Stanley showed up at my door. No warning, no driver, no bodyguard. Just him, in a dark coat, standing on my porch like a ghost in a storm. I opened the door, half expecting venom, but he didn't speak right away. Can I come in? I stepped aside. He didn't sit. He walked to the mantel, eyes scanning the photographs, Walter in his uniform, Derek's graduation, my wedding day in black and white. You've always been underestimated, he said. That was your mistake, I replied. He nodded, slowly. They're going to prosecute me. I know. I could fight it. You could try. He turned to me. I built that company, and you hollowed it out, I said. Amanda's trying to save what's left. His jaw twitched. She's not ready. She will be. End quote. End quote. He laughed once, bitter. She's got your grit. No, I said. She's got her own. You just never saw it. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. What's that? The rest, he said. Files I didn't store on company servers. Names, bank routes, the real damage. I took it, weighed it in my palm like it might explode. Why give it to me? Because Amanda deserves the truth, and maybe I owe you that much. I didn't thank him. Some truths don't earn gratitude. He turned to leave. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, Evelyn, you won. I looked him square in the eye. This was never a game. He left without another word. Later that night, I sat with the flash drive in one hand and Walter's last letter in the other. You'll be tested, it read, by greed, by pride, by betrayal, but not by loss. You've survived that already. I plugged in the drive. Folder after folder unfolded. And within them, the blueprint of a house built on sand. Illegal loans, political bribes, false patents, inflated assets. It wasn't just a scandal. It was a collapse waiting to happen. Amanda called an hour later. I heard he came to see you. He did. Did he say anything? I hesitated, then said, Enough. Her voice steadied. Tomorrow I'm calling the authorities. We're turning it over. All of it. I smiled. Not because it was easy, but because she chose right. You're ready, I said, and I meant it. The first headline hit just after sunrise. Clarendon Holdings CEO under investigation, family whistleblower exposes financial scandal. By mid-morning, every major outlet had picked it up. CNN, Bloomberg, The Times. Even the local Baltimore paper, The Banner, which hadn't called me in years, was suddenly at my doorstep wanting a quote. I gave none. This wasn't about me. Amanda, however, had no choice but to step into the light. Her first press conference was scheduled at noon, held not at some lavish ballroom, but in the Clarendon Holdings Conference Center. No spin doctors, no flashy lights, just her, a podium, and a stack of unredacted documents placed beside her like a silent vow. I sat in the back of the room, wearing a navy dress and a string of pearls Walter gave me for our 10th anniversary. They weren't real, just good enough to pass. Like me, once upon a time. Amanda stepped up to the microphone, took a breath, and looked out over the crowd of reporters and cameras. My name is Amanda Clarendon Brooks, she began, her voice strong but unpolished. I am the acting CEO of Clarendon Holdings. Today, I come to you not to defend what has happened, but to own it. A hush fell. You could almost hear the pens freeze midair. For over a decade, she continued, This company operated under a veil of deception, led by a man I trusted, admired, and loved, my father. I am not here to excuse his actions. I am here to correct them. She laid out the crimes, the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the partnerships forged through bribes and cover-ups. She named names, confirmed resignations, and detailed the full cooperation with federal investigators. And then she did something no one expected. She handed the microphone to me. I didn't want it. I didn't need it. But I took it. "My name is Evelyn Brooks," I said, letting the words settle in the room. "I was once just a teacher, a mother, a widow. I am also, as of this morning, the sole majority owner of this company." The room exploded in flashes, murmurs, gasps. "I am not here to take power. I am here to give it back to the people who deserve it, our workers, our partners, and the public whose trust we betrayed." End quote. I paused, scanning the crowd. Not for approval, for understanding. We allowed a man to build an empire on silence, mine included. But silence is no longer currency here. Truth is, Amanda stood beside me. She didn't smile. She didn't grandstand. She just stood with me, not behind me. After the conference, we rode back in the same car. Neither of us spoke for a while. The driver, a young man with earbuds in, pretended not to hear the silence stretching between two women on the edge of history. Finally, Amanda turned to me. "You didn't have to speak." "I did," I said. "Not for you, for me. For everyone who thinks their story ends with being underestimated." She nodded slowly. "I think he knew, my father, that it would come to this." "Maybe," I said, "but knowing and believing are two different things. It's know that." She leaned her head back against the seat, staring at the city rolling by. "I keep wondering," she murmured, "how long it takes to undo a lie." I looked at her, then out the window. "A lifetime," I said, "and sometimes more. But you start with one truth at a time." That evening, Derek came by with groceries. "I thought we could cook," he said, holding up a bag of sweet potatoes and a rotisserie chicken. "Now you remember what food looks like," I teased. We chopped and stirred in my kitchen like old times. He set the table. I lit candles, mostly for the scent cinnamon and clove. As we ate, he asked, "Do you regret not telling us sooner?" I chewed carefully, then answered, "No, I regret that I ever had to choose between survival and transparency. But I don't regret the road I took. It led me here." He nodded. "Do you think Amanda can keep doing this?" he asked. "Yes," I said, "if you don't let her carry it alone." He reached for my hand. "I'm proud of you, Mom." "I know," I said. "Took you long enough." We laughed. And for the first time in weeks, the house felt like home again. 3 days after the press conference, a courier knocked on my door holding a sleek black envelope sealed in gold foil. No return address, just a card that read, "The estate of Stanley T. Clarendon." Inside was a single-page letter from his attorneys. Stanley had rewritten his will 3 weeks before the press exploded. In it, he acknowledged wrongdoing, admitted guilt, and left behind something unexpected: a trust fund in Amanda's name, worth $25 million, to rebuild what I nearly destroyed. And, I have noted, he left nothing else to anyone. No art, no property. Not even the vacation home in Aspen that Amanda had loved as a child. All of it liquidated. All of it transferred into the trust protected from legal seizure under a clause in Delaware trust law he'd buried deep in the fine print. I read the letter twice, then folded it and placed it in my drawer next to Walter's letters. It was both a confession and a final attempt at control. Amanda came over that evening, face pale and stiff. "You got it too?" she asked. I nodded. "You going to keep it?" She looked away. "It feels dirty." "It is," I said. "But dirt doesn't ruin what you plant in it. It only matters what you grow." She stared at the letter in her hands like it was on fire. "I could turn it down," she murmured. "Give it to the victims. Donate it." "You could," I said. "Or you could take it and build something that makes the world better." She looked at me. Her eyes were clear, sharp, determined. "I want to open a foundation," she said, "for whistleblowers, for corporate accountability, real resources, legal support, protection." I smiled. Now that's a legacy. In the weeks that followed, the transition moved swiftly. Amanda appointed a new CFO, a woman from within the company, mid-40s, a quiet numbers genius who had raised 2 daughters while climbing the ranks. She replaced 3 board members, reinstated the union committee, and demanded an independent review of all remaining international contracts. Clarendon Holdings stock dipped briefly, then stabilized, then surged. Not because investors believed in Amanda yet, but because they believed in truth, and the market always rewards exposure of fraud, of leadership, of change. One afternoon, as summer slipped into early fall, I visited Walter's grave. I brought fresh tulips. He never liked roses. The cemetery was quiet, the air thick with that kind of late-day golden light that softens even the hardest stone. I told the truth, I whispered, kneeling. Just like you asked. I laid the flowers down, then touched the headstone with the back of my fingers. And you were right, Walter, I said. They never saw me coming. Behind me, someone cleared their throat. It was Derek, holding a coffee in one hand, his coat draped over the other arm. You didn't tell me you were coming here, he said. Didn't have to, I replied. You always knew where I'd be. He sat beside me on the bench. For a while, we said nothing. Then he turned to me, his voice softer now. Do you ever feel angry? That it took all this for people to finally see you? I thought about that. Not angry, I said. Just tired. Tired of how many women carry empires on their backs while being told they're just standing in the way. He nodded. Amanda said you're her compass now. She's her own compass, I said. I'm just the reminder she has one. He smiled. She's hosting a dinner next week. Investors, staff, some of the old board. She wants you there, not as a guest. As what? As the woman who saved the company. I looked out over the rows of headstones, each holding a story, a truth, a memory. Then I looked back at him. Tell her I'll be there, but only if there's cornbread. We laughed. The wind picked up, and I felt, for the first time in years, light. Not because everything was fixed, but because the truth had finally taken root. Amanda didn't host the dinner at a fancy hotel or a private club. She chose the rooftop of the newly renovated Clarendon Holdings headquarters, an open-air space that overlooked the river, with string lights swaying in the evening breeze and long tables dressed in white linen and fresh magnolias. Simple, intentional. No grand gestures, just good food, honest speeches, and a seat for everyone who mattered. When I arrived, the air buzzed with quiet curiosity. Some of the older board members nodded politely, unsure how to greet me now that the teacher had become the titan. The younger staff smiled wide, grateful finally to work for a company that felt like it had a soul. Amanda greeted me herself, wearing a deep emerald dress and low heels. She looked powerful but grounded, like someone who had walked through fire and made peace with the smoke still clinging to her sleeves. You came, she said. I told Derek there'd better be cornbread. If what? She grinned and waved over a waiter holding a tray. Made with honey and butter just like yours. We sat near the center of the longest table, under a canopy of lights. Around us were faces old and new compliance officers, interns, regional directors, even the janitorial lead who'd worked there for 30 years. No podium, no VIP section. Amanda stood, raised her glass, and the room quieted. I wanted to thank all of you, she began, not just for surviving the storm, but for helping rebuild what matters. People raised their glasses. There was a round of applause. She paused, then glanced at me. But more than anyone else, I want to thank Evelyn Brooks. A hush fell. Eyes turned toward me. Amanda's voice softened. Most of you know her as my mother-in-law. Some of you now know her as the majority shareholder. But I know her as the reason I became the woman standing here tonight. She held up a small photo, one I hadn't seen in years. Me and Walter at his retirement party. I was laughing, mid-sentence, hands wrapped around a glass of sweet tea. She's carried this family, and now she's helped carry this company, Amanda said. Not for power, not for applause, but because truth matters to her more than comfort. End quote. There was silence, and then applause, not the polite kind, but the full, rising kind that comes from a room where people finally see someone clearly. I stood, slowly. I didn't do this alone, I said. I just lit the match. Amanda kept the fire burning. I looked around at the faces. Each of you here decided not to walk away when the truth got messy. That matters. And I hope, going forward, we all remember that justice isn't about vengeance, it's about clarity. About knowing who we are and who we refuse to become. People nodded. Some wiped their eyes. Amanda raised her glass again. To new beginnings. And we drank. Later, as the evening wound down, Derek came up beside me on the balcony. The city lights twinkled below, reflected in the river like stars sinking toward the water. Dad would have loved this, he said. I nodded. He'd have stood by the grill complaining about the seasoning and pretending not to cry. Derek laughed. You miss him? Every day. He leaned on the railing. So what now, Mom? What do you want? I looked out over the skyline. The city that once saw me as invisible. The people who now saw me as the spine behind the change. I want to teach again, I said. He turned to me, surprised. Really? Not in a classroom. Not with chalk and lesson plans. But there are women out there like me. Older, overlooked, brilliant. I want to show them it's not too late. To start over? To rise, I said. Even after you've been seated in the back for half your life. He didn't speak, just nodded. That night, when I returned home, I pulled out a fresh notebook. On the first page, I wrote, "A new chapter begins not with ambition, but with clarity." It was nearly midnight when I sat down at my old writing desk, the one Walter refinished for me the summer Derek went off to college. The wood still held a faint smell of lemon oil and thyme. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, the kind with thick weight, the kind you save for something real. And I began to write a letter I never planned to send. Dear Amanda, there are some truths that don't fit in boardrooms or press conferences. Some that only live in quiet spaces, between the silence of breath and the turning of memory. So this letter is not for the public, it's for you. You see, long before you married my son, before you rolled your eyes at my cornbread or judged the way I wore flats to dinner parties, I saw you. I saw a young woman trying so hard to impress a man who never made room for softness. I saw a daughter carrying a father's expectations like a stone purse, always heavy, always full, never your choice. And I saw fear, not the loud kind, the quiet kind that curls around your ribs at night, whispering, "You're only as valuable as the power you hold." I knew that fear, because once I carried it too. When Walter died, people assumed I'd fold. A quiet woman, a widow. What could she possibly do alone? But grief taught me things no business degree ever could. It taught me that power isn't about who listens when you speak, it's about what you choose to say when no one's watching. It taught me how to listen for the lie behind the compliment, how to spot a smile with a dagger stitched inside. And it taught me to survive. Not in spite of being invisible, but because of it. Amanda, I never wanted to outshine you. I wanted you to see yourself beyond your father's shadow, to know that you were always more than his heir, you were your own beginning. You proved that, when you stood up there, telling the world the truth. When you didn't flinch, when you didn't run. That was your power, not mine. And if you ever feel small again, if the voices of men with long titles and short vision try to drown you, I want you to remember this. You come from a line of women who built their strength in silence and then turned it into thunder. I'm proud of you. Not because you're my daughter-in-law, not because you survived Stanley, but because you chose integrity over image, justice over legacy. That's a rare kind of bravery, and it's the kind the world needs more of. Always in your corner, Evelyn. I folded the letter gently and slipped it into a box I kept in the back of my closet. A box full of unsent truths, words I'd written for Walter, for Derek, even for myself. Letters that never needed stamps, only honesty. The next morning, I walked to the corner cafe for my usual tea and a blueberry muffin. The owner, a kind woman named Louisa, waved when she saw me. "You're famous now," she teased, handing over my cup. "Fame is just a louder version of misunderstanding," I replied. She chuckled. "You know, my daughter watched your press conference." She said, "That woman made me want to stand taller." I smiled. "Then tell her to never sit down again." As I stepped outside, a gust of wind carried the edge of fall into the air, crisp, fragrant, filled with change. I paused at the sidewalk, watching the city move. Fast, loud, distracted. But I felt calm. Not because the battle was over, because I knew who I was in it. And that was enough. That Sunday, I did something I hadn't done in years. I visited my old school. The brick building stood just off Lexington Avenue, a little worn, a little proud, like an elder who had nothing left to prove. The gate still squeaked, the steps still cracked in the same places. The paint on the cafeteria doors still peeled. But the halls? They whispered with memories, not just of students shouting and sneakers squeaking, but of moments, small ones. Notes passed, kindnesses given, courage learned. I wasn't there for nostalgia. I had come to drop off a donation, books, supplies, a new set of microscopes bought through a grant I'd quietly funded under the name Walter E. Brooks Memorial Education Fund. No press, no plaques, just giving back to the place that raised me when the world didn't. Principal Harris met me at the front office. He was younger than I expected, mid-30s, sharp eyes, and a kind smile that held weight behind it. "You're Evelyn Brooks," he said, shaking my hand. "We've heard stories. Most of them true," I smiled. "Some of them embellished by teenage rebellion." He laughed. "Your husband taught here too?" "History," I nodded. "The kind of teacher who made you feel like the Revolutionary War happened last week." He led me through the halls. We stopped outside my old classroom, room 112. It still had the faint scent of dry erase markers and old ambition. Inside, a young teacher was reading aloud from To Kill a Mockingbird. Her students listened, not all, but enough to matter. She looked up, startled. "Miss Jameson," Principal Harris said, "this is Evelyn Brooks. She once taught in this room." Her eyes widened. "This was your class?" I stepped in gently. The students turned, curious. "Yes," I said. "And let me tell you, those chairs haven't gotten any more comfortable." The room laughed, and something in my chest loosened. Later that afternoon, I walked to the small community museum 2 blocks over. It was a converted brownstone, run by volunteers, filled with donated photographs, clothing, letters. Not glamorous, but sacred in its own quiet way. I hadn't been there in decades. A retired librarian named Edith ran the front desk. Her hair was silver and tied back in a braid. She squinted when she saw me, then gasped, "Evelyn Brooks?" I smiled. Still standing, she reached across the counter and grabbed both my hands. "We've been wanting to honor you. All this talk lately, you're the reason some of these girls think they can change the world. I'm just the proof that it's possible," I said. She motioned me toward the second floor. "We made a space," she said. "Small, but it's yours." I climbed the stairs slowly. There, in a corner gallery, was a tiny exhibit. A glass case with a chalkboard bearing my handwriting, one of my lesson plans, a photo of me and Walter at a community awards night. But what stopped me, what caught my breath, was the title etched into the plaque above it all, "The Quiet Backbone, Evelyn Brooks and the Power of Persistence." I blinked quickly. One of the kids nearby said, "You were a teacher?" I turned to him. "Always." And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't until now. Legacy isn't measured in buildings named after you or companies you save. Legacy is the letter you never send, the student who stands taller, the family who eats together again. It's the small things, the quiet things, the real things. That night, Amanda called. Her voice held that soft urgency I recognized as hope, trying not to jinx itself. "I've been invited to speak at the National Business Ethics Summit," she said. I smiled. "They finally realized women can lead and have a conscience." She laughed. "I don't want to talk about the scandal." "Then don't." "In one, I want to talk about rebuilding, about mentorship, about you." I paused. "You'll speak your truth. That's enough." She was quiet for a beat. "You're coming with me, right? To Vegas?" I teased. "I don't even like slot machines. I need you there." I glanced at the box of unsent letters still tucked under my desk. Then I nodded. "I'll be there," I said, "but only if there's sweet tea at the hotel." We laughed, the kind of laughter that comes after rain. The Business Ethics Summit was held at a grand hotel on the Las Vegas Strip, one of those towering glass structures that gleamed with artificial stars and the scent of ambition. You could practically hear the deals being drafted in every corner of the lobby, between overpriced lattes and perfectly pressed suits. Amanda had been placed as the keynote speaker prime slot, right after the CEO of a major pharmaceutical company and just before a panel on restorative capitalism. I could already hear Walter chuckling in my head. Restorative capitalism? That's like ethical gambling, nice idea, no odds. I arrived a day early, dressed in my favorite travel cardigan, flats, and an attitude that didn't need validation. Amanda met me in the lobby. Her dress was elegant but simple navy, no frills, just power and clean lines, but her hands fidgeted, betraying her nerves. "You've done harder things," I told her. "Not in front of 2,000 people." End quote. "You dismantled your father's empire with less than that. You'll be fine." She nodded, but her jaw remained tight. Backstage the next afternoon, I watched from the wings as Amanda stepped to the podium. The lights dimmed, the murmurs died, and then just her. Not the Clarendon heiress, not the scandal, just Amanda. "My name is Amanda Clarendon Brooks," she began, her voice steady but warm. "And I used to believe business was about winning." A beat of silence. Then I discovered it was really about hiding, about protecting legacies rather than earning them, about silence more than substance. The room leaned in. "I stand here not because I did everything right, but because I chose to stop pretending everything was." She didn't use notes. She didn't pace. She just stood and spoke, her truth flowing out like a river finally breaking its dam. I inherited power, yes, but I nearly drowned in it. Until someone handed me a rope. She didn't shout. She didn't shame. She just showed me what accountability looks like when it's done with grace. She paused. "And she's sitting right there." The spotlight shifted, landed on me. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I nodded once. The room turned. And in that moment, they didn't see a former teacher or a grieving widow. They saw the reason Amanda stood tall. After the applause, after the interviews, after the handshakes and cards exchanged, Amanda and I sat on the balcony of her hotel suite. The strip below buzzed with neon distractions. But up here, it was quiet. "You were brilliant," I said. She sipped her water, then exhaled. "I almost lost it. When I mentioned you, I almost lost it too. But this dress was expensive." We laughed. Then she turned serious. "They asked me to serve on the National Board for Corporate Responsibility." "You'll do it?" She nodded. "Yes, and I want you as my advisor." I looked at her. "Amanda, I didn't come here to build a second empire." Ate breathed. "I'm not asking for that. I'm asking for you to keep doing what you've always done. See what others miss. Say what needs to be said." I considered it. Then I said the one thing I never thought I'd say again. "All right, one more chapter." She leaned her head on my shoulder. Not out of weakness, but out of respect. The way a daughter might. And though we'd never used those words between us, I felt something shift quiet and irreversible. Not blood, but bond. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Sometimes the world doesn't need a revolution. Sometimes it just needs a woman to finally be heard." 2 weeks after the summit, Amanda was invited to Washington, D.C. to testify before a congressional subcommittee on corporate transparency. It wasn't just a ceremonial invitation. It was national now. Clarendon Holdings had become the face of both disgrace and redemption. She asked me to come with her, not to speak, not to sit beside her, just to be there, to remind her who she was before the lights, before the headlines, before she'd learned to anchor her voice in something deeper than inheritance. We arrived the night before. The hotel was old, wrapped in the kind of elegance that whispered power in the wallpaper. Marble floors, velvet chairs. A place where senators had likely whispered deals over scotch for the past 50 years. That night, Amanda barely ate. She pushed her roasted chicken around the plate, eyes distant. "You know they'll come for me," she said. "Try to poke holes, make me look like I was part of the machine the whole time." "They'll try," I said, buttering a roll. "Let them." She looked up. "What if I fall apart?" "You won't." "How do you know?" I set the roll down. "Because you've already walked through fire. What's a little smoke to you now?" The next morning, the Rayburn House office building loomed over us like a cold cathedral of law. The hearing room was packed, press in the back, aides with laptops in the corners, rows of dark-suited men checking their watches like justice had a curfew. Amanda sat tall at the witness table, a small plaque with her name in front of her. Representative Ed Myers, a sharp-tongued congressman from the Finance Committee, opened the questions. "Miss Clarendon Brooks, at what point did you become aware of the criminal activities within your family's company?" Amanda answered without hesitation. I began to suspect after my father stepped down. The internal audit confirmed those suspicions. He leaned in. But you benefited from those crimes for years, did you not? Yes, she said plainly, and I am responsible for what I do with that benefit now. A murmur of approval rose. Another congresswoman asked about restitution, about employee compensation, about the whistleblower fund Amanda was building. She detailed each plan with precision. No spin, no apology tours, just the facts and a fierce clarity about the path forward. The hearing lasted almost 3 hours. At the end, Representative Myers asked one last question. What do you say to Americans who've lost faith in corporate integrity? Amanda paused. Then she said, I say, look at who's rebuilding it. Afterward, as we walked through the marble corridors of the Capitol, I saw people nod to her, not the fake kind, the kind that says, we see you now. She stopped beside a marble column and let out a long breath. I thought I'd be more relieved, she said. Relief is quiet, I told her. It comes later, when no one's looking. She turned to me. You still think I can do this? I think you already are. That evening, back at the hotel, Amanda received an email from the committee chair. It was short. Your testimony today changed minds. Thank you for showing us what accountability can look like. She showed it to me. Then she said, he wouldn't have written this if it came from me alone. I didn't respond, because she was wrong. She had done it alone. She had carried her name through the fire and didn't let it burn her to ash. Instead, she turned it into a torch. And it was lighting the way forward for more than just herself. The first letter arrived on a Wednesday. It wasn't a bill or a campaign flyer. It was handwritten, inked in looping cursive, with a return address from Kentucky. Dear Mrs. Brooks, it began, I watched your daughter-in-law's testimony. My husband worked for Clarendon. He died before the layoffs, but he loved that job. Said it was the first time he felt like he mattered. I wanted you to know I believe in what you're doing. Thank you for making it right. I read it 3 times, and I cried. Not because it praised us, but because it came from someone we hadn't seen. Someone far from the spotlight. Someone who'd felt the impact and never expected a voice. By Friday, there were a dozen more letters. From factory workers, from former interns, from grandmothers whose pensions had been protected by the board's reforms. They weren't loud, they weren't fancy, but they were real. Each one said the same thing, in different words. We see you now, and we believe again. I'm ground. Amanda came over that evening. I showed her the stack, neatly rubber-banded and tied with twine. Her hands shook as she read the first one. I didn't think this would matter to anyone but us, she whispered. It always matters, I said. The truth always lands somewhere. Sometimes it just takes longer to echo. We spent the evening reading every letter, out loud, over tea and warm peach cobbler, the kind Walter used to ask for every year on his birthday. For the first time in months, Amanda didn't talk about the next meeting or the next crisis. She just sat on the couch with her feet curled beneath her like she used to, when she and Derek first married and still felt new to the family. She looked up at me. I miss him, she said. Even after everything. I know, I said. Grief doesn't ask permission. It just stays, changes shape, but never leaves. She wiped her eyes. Do you think he was ever proud of me? I think he always was, I said gently. He just didn't know how to show it. That weekend, I made a decision. The Community Museum offered me a chance to curate an exhibit on women in business ethics, a local spotlight for national figures. Amanda was reluctant at first. Feels too soon, she said. It's never too soon to remind people what courage looks like, I told her. We chose photos that told the story, not just the glossy ones, but the hard ones. A copy of Amanda's resignation from her father's private board. A still frame from the press conference. A photo of the first whistleblower who came forward under her foundation's protection face blurred, but name acknowledged in a letter of thanks. The final plaque held a quote from Amanda herself. Justice isn't a finish line, it's a daily choice to keep standing, even when the ground shakes beneath you. They were 5 friends, the braided. On the opening night, the museum was filled with families, students, retired teachers, and a few skeptical business types who kept checking their watches. But by the end of the exhibit, even they stood a little straighter. Amanda took my hand as we walked out. Did you ever think we'd end up here? She asked. No, I said. But I never doubted we'd survive. She smiled. Next step? You tell me. She thought for a moment, then said, I want to take this on the road. Not just speeches, workshops, classes, community partnerships. Teach people what justice looks like before it's needed. I nodded. Then I guess we've got more walking to do. The tour didn't begin with a bang. There were no press releases, no launch parties. Just Amanda, a rented minivan, and me in the passenger seat with a thermos of mint tea and a folder of community center addresses tucked into my lap. We started small: Richmond, Savannah, Birmingham. Amanda would lead sessions in borrowed church halls and city libraries. She didn't wear suits, she wore sweaters and flat shoes. And she spoke like a woman who had unlearned the language of performance in favor of something far rarer: truth. Our audiences weren't CEOs or boardroom elites. They were single mothers, veterans, laid-off workers, students drowning in debt, people who had long stopped believing anyone in power could speak to them, let alone for them. At one session in Charlotte, a woman raised her hand and asked, "What gave you the right to change the rules after benefiting from them for so long?" Amanda didn't blink. "I didn't have the right," she said. "I had the responsibility. Once you know the harm, staying quiet becomes a choice. And I chose not to make it anymore." There was a beat of silence, then a slow, steady clap, not theatrical, just real. That's how it always started, with doubt, and ended with people leaning forward again. One evening, in a tiny diner outside of Nashville, Amanda and I sat across from each other, plates of fried catfish and collard greens between us. She looked tired. The kind of tired that seeps into your bones after long days of telling your story over and over. "Do you think it's enough?" she asked, stirring her iced tea. "Enough for what?" "To fix it. The years we didn't see, the ones we looked away." I paused. "You can't fix what was. You can only honor it by choosing better now." She nodded. "I think about him sometimes. My father, wondering if he'd have ever come around. If there was a version of this life where we worked together instead of tearing it down." "Maybe," I said, "but not this one. And that's okay. We're building something different." She reached into her bag and pulled out a notebook. Inside were letters, dozens, more from strangers, from whistleblowers, from young girls in college who saw Amanda as proof they could make noise and still be taken seriously. She slid one toward me. "Dear Amanda, my mother told me I'd have to be twice as good to get half as far. Watching you made me believe I could be twice as loud too." My throat tightened. Amanda watched me. "I keep every one," she said. "They remind me why I keep going." By the time we reached Chicago, the sessions had grown. The media caught wind. Not in a scandal-chasing way, but in the way that happens when something honest survives long enough to be undeniable. A local reporter asked me, "Do you ever worry you're just a symbol now?" I looked at her and said, "Symbols fade, stories stay. We're storytellers." That night, Amanda spoke at a high school auditorium packed with teachers and teenagers. She opened with a line I hadn't heard her say before. "I grew up in a house of silence, but I live now by the sound of truth." It arcaned. The kids clapped like they'd just seen a superhero land. And maybe they had, not because she was flawless, but because she was still standing, still speaking, still rebuilding, one stop at a time. We were halfway through a snowy Michigan tour stop when the invitation arrived. A national education conference in Boston keynote slot, expenses paid, a chance to speak not just about corporate reform, but about rebuilding ethical literacy from the classroom up. Amanda hesitated. "It's not really my world," she said. "But it should be," I replied. "Because change doesn't start in boardrooms, it starts in classrooms, in kids learning that silence isn't safety." She nodded slowly. "Then we go." End quote. Boston was cold, sharp with February wind and sky like wet stone. The conference was held in a tall glass center, surrounded by universities and cathedrals, old knowledge and new ideals colliding. Amanda's speech was different this time. No talk of companies, no names dropped, just stories. Of watching systems break people, of unlearning shame, of one black woman, me handing her a mirror instead of a rope. "I didn't inherit integrity," she told the crowd. "I borrowed it. From the woman who saw the cracks in me and refused to let them become my shape." And then, she did something unexpected. She stepped back from the microphone, looked at me in the front row, and said, "Would you come up here?" The audience turned. I didn't move right away, not because I was afraid, but because I knew this moment wasn't about me. It was about what I represented. I rose, walked to the stage, and stood beside her. Amanda handed me the microphone. I didn't have a speech prepared. I didn't need one. I used to teach 8th grade civics, I said, and I used to tell my students something simple, something quiet. I told them that power without conscience is just noise. But when you add clarity, real clarity, you don't need a title. You don't need permission. You just need to stand. I looked at the sea of faces, some nodding, some wiping their eyes, all listening. And if no one else tells you this today, let me be the one. I continued. You matter more than the systems built to overlook you. Don't wait for justice to be handed down. Carry it, pass it, make it ordinary. The standing ovation was long, but what mattered more were the young women who lined up afterward. Brown girls, quiet girls, girls who didn't think they belonged on stages like that. One whispered, "You made me believe I can grow up and not shrink." Another said, "I wrote down everything you said. I'm going to read it to my grandma." I was kind of to just prove it. Amanda and I stood with them until the conference hall emptied. And in every conversation, I saw it. The fire. Not flashy, not explosive, just steady. Like a torch, passed down, one hand to another. That night, Amanda and I sat by the hotel fireplace. The snow tapped gently at the windows like it, too, had something to say. She stared at the flames. "I think I found it," she said. "Found what?" "My purpose. Not to lead corporations, but to help rebuild people." I smiled. "Then this is only the beginning." She turned to me. "You ever think we'd end up here?" I looked into the fire, where shadows danced like memories. "No," I said, "but I always hoped we'd find a place where the truth could warm more than just us." When we returned from Boston, the house felt different. Not smaller, not colder, just quieter. Like it had been waiting for the words we'd spoken, for the changes we'd set in motion, for the truth to settle into the wood grain and walls like smoke after a long fire. I walked past Walter's old study, still untouched. His reading glasses still rested on the desk. His worn leather chair still turned slightly toward the window where the evening light once warmed his shoulders. For the first time in months, I stepped inside. Not to clean, not to organize, just to sit. I lowered myself into his chair, closed my eyes, and listened. The echoes came gently, a lecture he once rehearsed. The sound of his pen scribbling notes in the margins of whatever worn paperback had caught his interest. His laughter, that rich, deep sound that had carried us through every hard season. And then, something else. My own voice. Soft, unsure, from years ago, telling him I didn't want to be just a mother-in-law, that I wanted to teach again, build again, matter again. He had taken my hand and said, "Then show them. Not ask them, not wait for them. Show them." I opened my eyes. That night, I cleared the room. Not out of grief, but out of gratitude. I kept the chair, the desk, but the rest, his old textbooks, the yellowing maps, even the awards went into boxes I labeled for donation. Let some other young teacher find inspiration in them now. I needed the space for something new. Amanda came by the next morning with coffee and a legal pad full of scribbled ideas. "I've been thinking about the next phase," she said, sliding into the kitchen chair like it was her own. She always did that now, like the house had stopped being mine and become ours. "I want to build something permanent," she said. "Not just talks and workshops. A center, a physical place where people can come, learn, heal, reclaim. A sanctuary?" I asked. "Exactly. For justice, for dignity, for the people who keep being told to wait their turn." I looked at her. Really looked. This was no longer Stanley's daughter. No longer Derek's wife. She was herself now, and I knew exactly where she'd found that woman. "In Walter's old study," I said. "We have room." Her eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "I am," I said. "That room gave Walter purpose for years. Time it gave someone else the same." She stood and hugged me. Not quick, not perfunctory, long, like family does. Weeks passed. The study transformed. Fresh paint, soft chairs, shelves not lined with achievements, but with possibility books by authors long overlooked, binders filled with curricula built around inclusion, equity, the kind of ethics that start at the soul and stretch into systems. We named it the Clarity Room, a place where silence came to speak. At the ribbon cutting, Amanda gave a short speech. I didn't say anything this time. I just watched her thank our community, watched her acknowledge our missteps, watched her point to the future not with fear, but with certainty. And then, when the applause faded, she looked at me. She mouthed the words, "Thank you." I didn't answer aloud, but inside, I whispered, "You're welcome. Now carry it forward." Spring returned like a soft-spoken promise. Magnolia buds opened on the trees, the air carried the smell of soil and new beginnings, and every front porch in the neighborhood seemed to hum with life again, sweeping, rocking chairs creaking, wind chimes telling stories in little songs. Amanda had moved into a home 2 streets over. Nothing extravagant. A white house with blue shutters, a garden in the back she was learning to tend. Sometimes I'd see her out early, in old sneakers and a sweatshirt, sleeves rolled up, coaxing herbs out of the earth like second chances. We still met for tea every Sunday, still argued over crossword puzzles, still passed the same notebook back and forth filled now with lesson plans, quotes, stories from the road. But life had softened. The pace had slowed. The world had seen our fire, and now we were keeping it warm. One Saturday morning, I sat on my porch, watching a young girl ride her bike down the street. She was maybe 9, maybe 10, brown skin, hair braided, wearing a t-shirt that said, "Loud is my love language." I smiled. She reminded me of Amanda, before the armor. She stopped at the edge of my yard, lifted her chin, and called out, "Are you the lady from the museum?" I stood slowly. "I might be. My grandma said you were brave." I tilted my head. "What do you think bravery is?" She thought for a second. "It's when you don't let the mean stuff make you mean too." I laughed. "Then I guess I am the lady from the museum." She waved, kicked her bike into motion, and sped off. That night, I sat with my journal, the same one I started after Walter passed, the same one that held Amanda's first confession, Derek's apology, my letter that never got mailed. I turned to the last page, and I wrote, "Justice is not a final act. It's the practice of keeping the light on for those who come after you, still searching for the door." I closed the journal, pressed my hand to the cover. Not in sadness, but in peace. The journey wasn't over, but this chapter was. And it ended not with revenge, or a takedown, or an empire crumbling. It ended with a home that stayed standing, with women who spoke and were heard, with a family tattered, mended, but real, and a porch light that stayed on, always.